USDA's FY25 budget request totals $25.1 billion, an increase of $2.2 billion, or almost 10% over last year's levels. Has it reduced obesity? You can get back to me on that. That's quite all right.
Fundamentally, that's the issue.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to reclaim my time.
It's not just poor people that are obese.
Let's set up an office of the food police.
I'm asking what you're doing to stand up for those farmers right now.
Stand up for farmers every single day, sir.
Well, the
every
Department-
single day.
but
Every
the
single
Department
day.
So how do we get the shrimp on that list?
Innovative community-based urban farms.
The Wuhan Institute of Virology had walls, and it was identified.
We're not in China, sir. It's a different
as an
deal.
affiliate.
You're doing a disservice to the professionals and scientists who work for USDA when you say that, sir.
You're doing a disservice to our national security and
No,
to our country.
not even close.
I know there are many black farmers, well, not a lot.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
USDA's FY25 budget request totals $25.1 billion, an increase of $2.2 billion, or almost 10% over last year's levels. Cases. So given this rise in obesity rates, is there any evidence that the SNAP-Ed nutritional education and the healthy incentive programs have been effective in having reduced obesity among SNAP participants?
There is research to indicate that the availability of SNAP does result in healthier choices being made by SNAP families.
So the risk of obesity, so obesity has gone down in SNAP recipients? That was my question. Is there any, has it reduced obesity? You can get back to me on that. That's quite all right. Along the similar lines, the summer EBT program, which you mentioned for children, is now permanent. States operating the summer EBT run the SNAP model, so again, allowing access to sugary beverages, salty snacks, the whole deal. But interesting, Indian tribal organizations operate the WIC model. So as I understand it, families receiving the summer EBT under the WIC model are purchasing WIC-approved foods, which we both, I think, recognize are generally much more nutritious foods than the wide variety of foods available under SNAP. Do you think that recipients could benefit if states operate a WIC model under the summer EBT program, like tribal organizations do, to ensure that we're providing kids with healthy food during the summer? Just like USDA does, for instance, during the school year in the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs.
I think it's more complicated than that.
So it doesn't work for the tribal organizations?
I'm not saying it doesn't work, but
okay.
obviously tribes are a smaller universe of people.
So what you're saying is that it works for the tribal organizations, but we don't think it'll work if you expand it.
What I'm saying is, and I was going to respond to this, but you cut me off, there's a fairness issue here. Okay, there's a fairness and a consistency issue. If indeed the goal here is for taxpayer dollars to be directly linked to more nutritious decisions, are you going to make that same decision for farm emergency relief? Farmer gets emergency check from the government, cashes it, goes to the grocery store. Are you going to restrict him from? Why not?
Well,
that's fundamentally that's the issue.
Mr. Secretary,
it's
I'm going to
absolutely
reclaim my
the issue.
time. We just had Francis Collins in a discussion with the Doc Caucus this morning, and at the end I asked him, Dr. Collins, Dr. Sharfstein, another doctor from the White House, all three doctors, does it make any sense that we're providing non-nutritious foods in the SNAP program knowing we have an obesity epidemic? I urge you to ask some physicians you know as to whether or not it makes sense we do it.
It's not just poor people that are obese. It's middle-income people, it's rich people. I mean, it's an issue all across the country.
Mr. Secretary, the difference is we're not buying food for the
you are.
middle-class people. We're buying food.
But you are. Absolutely you are.
Mr. Secretary, I'm not going.
If you get any federal assistance.
If you think that providing sugary beverages and salty snacks is a good idea.
I don't think
with
that.
the federal government, then I hope you and I can work together on a solution.
I don't think that. I think it's a matter of fairness. If you got to treat one, you got to treat them all.
That's my point with the tribal organizations and summer EBT.
ERS says that between 2020 and 2022 that the rural population increased by 0.25%, which is not a lot to celebrate, but it's a change in what the trends have been over the years. So can you share your thoughts on how that came about?
Obviously, the degree to which we are investing resources in rural America has increased through the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act. Farm income improving obviously was a component of this. Investments in the Rural Partnership Network, I think, are also critically important. By focusing on the persistently poor areas as we are with RPN, we're essentially allowing and providing intensive care for those areas, investing in critical infrastructure, critical economic development opportunities in those areas, resulting in more jobs, more income, and I think a sense of hope. I think to the extent that we are expanding climate-smart agriculture, to the extent that we are seeing more new and beginning and young farmers, which is the one positive from the farm survey that came out recently. We've seen an increase in beginning farmers. We've seen an increase in young farmers. We've seen an increase in veteran farmers, continuing to invest in those opportunities. So it's a combination of many, many, many things.
It made rivers flood in areas that weren't previously expected, and farmers were waking up with 2 to 3 feet of water and having to evacuate cattle just to save them and try to do as much as they possibly could. And for some reason, dairy's been left out of this. So as you have a discretionary powers with the CCC, what plans do you have to provide assistance to our state's dairy industry recovering from this crisis?
Well, just to be clear, for the chairman's benefit, I don't have discretionary authority. I have to work within the guidelines set forth in the charter.
But no one challenged Purdue when he did that for Puerto Rico, and that was a territory. Now we're talking about one of our own states.
Chairman Harris apparently wasn't in the position he's in now.
Well,
No, look, in order for the CCC to work, you have to stay within the guidelines. You have to stay within the charter. That is how Congress has authorized the development of the CC, and it's basically said it can be used to promote commodities.
so I guess the question is if one secretary was able to do it and no one challenged that secretary, why is this one different? And why do you feel like you need to go that? And obviously, I'd like to give you more discretion so that this wouldn't be a debate, but the opportunity was there and it's been done.
I can't speak to what motivated Secretary Perdue to do what he did. What I can tell you is that I ask our general counsel's office, anytime we do anything with CCC, is this authorized by the charter? Because I want to stay within those guidelines. And that's one of the reasons why we have never drained the CCC, as was the case in the previous administration, forcing you all to have to replenish it. We haven't done that. We're not going to do that because that's not, in my view, the way that should operate.
So and I think we're just going to have a fundamental disagreement there, because if there was no challenge from anyone when the last secretary did it, and then if you're just going to keep the money there and not help farmers across our own country, what purpose do you serve and what purpose does any of this serve?
That's not to say that we're not using those resources to help farmers. For example, we use CCC to encourage purchases of food banks and for schools, which obviously will help the dairy industry because a portion of what's purchased is dairy product. We use the CCC to reduce fertilizer costs for farmers. We've used the CCC for a multitude of other commodity-related programs for farmers. The avian influenza is another example of resources that have gone into California and elsewhere that have been hit by avian influenza. So we use the CCC to help farmers. We just use it within the confines and structure of the charter.
Well, it's not been challenged before. It's happened before. There's a precedent to follow on this one. And then as far as the pricing side of things, I think the prices right now, when you look at the majority of commodities, they're in probably some of the worst shape we've ever seen. We got cheese prices sitting at $1.47, I think, today. And we had prices in the last few years where butter was sitting up close to $4 and it's down under $2. When you look at almonds are down under $2 when there was a time they were up above $4. Pistachios on their way down. Almonds or walnuts are at about a third of their cost of production. Table grapes are struggling. I mean, there's a lot of evidence where you're saying that you're using this to help farmer prices, but there's no evidence to back that up. Now, there's a precedent that can be set, that has been set on helping dairy farmers who have needed help in the past. And there's an opportunity here to help one specific category that did not qualify for any of the other assistance that was provided during those same storms. Why are they being left behind? So I think my time's expired. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Just an aside, I guess anyone who gets a federal subsidy, we ought to just see whether or not they are obese. And if that's the case, let's check into what kind of food they're buying. Let's set up an office of the food police. I know that the USDA worked with OMB on developing the program. Can you just kind of walk us through the process in developing the program, why we think this is a good solution to protecting WIC access and participation?
Let me start by talking about how we managed 2024 given the lateness of the budget and the uncertainty about WIC. We actually had to transfer resources from other nutrition programs, and part of the reason why we have the request that we have is to refill those transfers. So it's, in addition to the WIC program, it's also to get it back in fiscal order, number one. Number two, we have two different contingency funds. One is a smaller contingency fund designed to address specific state issues. From time to time, states have an issue relative to their ability within WIC to provide the WIC services. So this smaller emergency is designed to be able to provide individual state opportunities. The larger emergency is, to your point, if we are confronted with a circumstance where there's uncertainty or whether the WIC budget is not fully and adequately funded for whatever reason, or we are faced with a shutdown, that we basically have the resources to continue uninterrupted the services that are so important. And that's the benefit of the second contingency fund.
As the Secretary of Agriculture, how are you standing up for American farmers and telling your counterpart at the Department of Labor that her regulations are hurting American farmers?
You know, there are two parties here. In addition to the farmers, there are also the hardworking farm workers. And this is tough work. It's hard work. Part of the challenge with these wage rates is the situation where a farm worker is asked to do more than farm work, is asked to do a skilled position, a skilled job, and that's where a lot of the adjustment has taken place. So when they're asked to do more than just a farm job, a farm worker job, they're asked to do a skilled job, isn't it fair to make sure that they are adequately compensated for that job?
Absolutely.
Well, that's part of
Unfortunately,
the challenge.
they are overcompensated, and they're putting farms at risk. I don't think the status quo is going to work for
I don't know
farmers
that-
in America.
I don't know that they're overcompensated.
Well,
I'm pretty sure
if
they're
you
not
talk to the farmers, the fifth and sixth generation farmers in my district, they are not going to make it as farmers. And
I don't have any doubt that farmers are concerned about this, but they also need to make sure they understand that fixing the system is the way to do this. It isn't just a freeze for a year or two. That's just going to delay the inevitable. You got to fix the system.
Well, I'm asking what you're doing to stand up for those farmers right now.
Stand up for farmers every single day, sir.
Well, the
every
Department-
single day.
but
Every
the
single
Department
day.
Sir, the
I
Department of...
expand income. I
Okay,
work to expand
sir,
exports.
Sir,
you know,
please let me finish my question. The Department of Labor has mandated these cost increases every year for the last 10 years. Where are you
Based on the
speaking out
data.
on this, that it's
Based on the
it's a
data.
terrible mandate?
Based on the data.
Okay.
The data
Well,
doesn't
your
lie.
predecessor, Secretary Perdue, stated the Farm Labor Survey was not designed to be used as a source of wage rates for the H-2A program. Do you agree with him?
I think it is an accurate and an appropriate vehicle to be used. Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't you want the farm labor costs to be calculated and included in that?
Well, I think the point is $18.50 an hour in Michigan, plus housing, plus transportation. Our farmers cannot afford that. And you are standing by idly while the Department of Labor
That's not true.
Secretary is continuing to raise the costs on American farmers who are not going to be able to make it.
So, in light of that, in a very positive way, I wanted to ask, what are some of the things that you're doing to help rein in the cost of labor? But on top of that, what other tools do you think you could use from Congress in order to help accomplish that?
You know, Representative, it's not just today that we've lost farms.
No, I know.
Since 1981, we've lost roughly 450,000 farms. Excuse me, no, I'm sorry, 544,000 farms.
In 40 years.
That is the same number of farms that exist today in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Colorado, Missouri, and Oklahoma. We've lost 151 million acres of land that was in farming that's no longer in farming. That's the landmass of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Maryland, most of Virginia. So this is not a new issue. And part of the problem is that the system is designed for productivity and production of a commodity of which there is small profit, if any profit. So you have to have a lot of it. As Secretary Perdue said in Wisconsin, in America, you got to get big or get out. The problem with that is that the income in farming is concentrated. 3 best years we've ever had in farm income, the top 7% of farms that sell more than $500,000 in sales got 85 to 89% of the income, which meant that 1.8 million farms, some of the farmers you're talking to, had to share 11% or 15%. That's the challenge here, is to create a companion system that isn't just about productivity, but it's about income sources. 88% of American farmers work 2 jobs. Why is it that we're allowing farmers to work 2 jobs? Why aren't we figuring out ways in which the farm can generate 2, 3, 4 income sources? So if you want to really help your farmers, then I would say 2 things. Pass immigration reform
Get
or the
that. I
Modernization
appreciate
Act. Okay, pass it. No excuses. Get it done. And then secondly, work with us to continue to create new revenue streams, new ways in which agricultural waste can be converted to something more valuable, ways in which renewable energy can be generated on the farm and used to lower costs for everybody in the neighborhood. Work with us to rebuild a resilient local and regional food system. That creates multiple revenue sources that don't exist or don't exist enough of today. And that's what we're trying to do.
Another top priority for national security is also to ensure that our domestic supply chains, not just food, are safe from foreign adversaries like China. I don't want to see those exploited by the PRC, especially true for inputs like animal feed. China controls over 90% of the world's production of vitamins B6 and C. So what are the risks of having too heavy of a reliance on a foreign adversary like China for those critical agricultural inputs?
What's one of the reasons why we are investing resources, for example, in fertilizer? Because we were over-reliant on Russia and Belarus. So we have to look for ways in which we can be more self-reliant. You also recognize, I'm sure you do, that for Iowa farmers, the number 1 customer for what we sell and what we grow in Iowa is China.
Yep.
So it's a delicate conversation that we have with our number 1 customer, at the same time, somebody that we're deeply concerned about.
We had the China Select Committee had a hearing in my district in Tama County just last summer with Ranking Member Krishnamurthy came from Illinois, as well as Chairman Gallagher, and we heard directly from the soybean producers that, oh, hey, tread carefully here because this is a cycle that we need to be conscious of. So
Tough conversation.
certainly aware of that as well, and hear that directly from our producers every day.
I want to just turn to a topic that is synonymous with Florida, and that's the citrus industry. We have been dealing with a really serious citrus greening challenge. That there has been some significant progress made in the investments, as a result of the investments in researching how to combat citrus greening. It's slashed Florida's citrus program and production by a whopping 75%, and that's more than doubled the production costs for producers. So we've been investing significant funds in the Citrus Health Response Program for several years. Can you talk about how that program has developed new therapies to combat citrus greening? And also, we're really in need of assistance for a lot of the citrus farmers who have been struggling and have been working with you on that as well.
It's developed an opportunity to prevent or to deal with citrus greening. The problem is the cost of it is fairly significant. And I think that's the next hurdle, is how do we get the cost down so that it's available to producers?
Mr. Secretary, do you anticipate responding to these requests? And what more can I tell my constituents who continue to ask if your administration will use its authority to consider drought as adverse weather for farm-raised fish?
Appreciate you raising the question. I'm happy to work with you and your team on whether or not we have the discretion that you believe we may have. I'm not confident of that. I want to make sure that we, in fact, have that discretion. If we do, then I'm more than happy to work with you to see if there's a way in which we can provide some assistance.
Absolutely. You most certainly do. I had language included in the final fiscal year 24 appropriations bill directing you to do this. Will you use that authority to include drought as a cause of loss for farm-raised fish?
I'm happy to work. I'm reluctant to say yes for this reason. I just want to make sure that legally everything is in order. Because sometimes people think we've got discretion. Sometimes you've given us instructions and directions only to find that the vehicle through which we would provide that assistance doesn't fit. So I just want to make sure that everything's aligned, and that's why I would like to work with your team.
Great. Any idea when you can give me a
Well, we can-
response or an answer?
we-
So I can tell my constituents.
Sure, we can work with you, and there's no effort to delay here. It's just I want to make sure I'm right when I say I can help you.
Okay, great.
So I'm encouraged to see that the president's budget request includes $985 million for NRCS, with plans to hire thousands of employees to help implement farmer-friendly policies included in the Inflation Reduction Act. Could you elaborate on why a fully staffed NRCS is essential for supporting and empowering our farmers nationwide?
The ability to determine precisely what kind of opportunities are available. I've just got a list here of 20 different climate-smart agriculture practices that the
Excellent.
NRCS has, and under each one of these categories, there's multiple choices. It can be complicated, and so it's important for folks to have the ability to talk to an NRCS person.
Yes.
They have their crop specialist, but maybe some farmers, small and mid-sized farmers, can't afford a crop specialist to provide that technical assistance, so they rely on the NRCS folks to provide them, this is what you should do, this is what you think about doing.
Yes, sir. Well, if you could share that list with our office, we'll be sure to circulate that among our colleagues on the committee.
How does the USDA plan to explore and potentially implement such measures to further support our domestic shrimp industry and enable a sustainable path forwards?
We essentially try to respond to the market. If there is a demand for us to consider an expansion of an item, and there's the availability of the item, and the cost of the item is something that school districts can afford, or that we can afford, we're more than happy to take a look at that. So it's a basic decision. Is there demand? Is there supply? What's the cost? What's the impact on the overall? You mentioned Section 32. Right now, we have, for every dollar we have, there's $2 of demand. So it's a challenge for us.
So how do we get the shrimp on that list? Is it possible? I mean, is it possible to get it on that list and figure out what the demand is?
Well, I think I would suggest it's the other way around. I think you can come to us and say, based on school districts in the following areas, following states, following regions of the country, here is the interest in having this as part of the opportunity for kids. And based on that, we would then trigger a review, an evaluation of that market and of the supply and of the cost to determine whether or not it could be added in a way that wasn't detrimental to the overall program.
I'm wondering, I know the budget supports innovative community-based urban farms like the ones in my district, but seems like they're having a hard time accessing the funds, and I don't know if they need technical assistance or easier access to the funding, or how do you think USDA can make it more accessible?
I'm going to work backwards from the questions you asked. Actually, the budget that you just passed cuts the funding to urban ag, which makes it even more difficult than it was before. So you may want to take a look at how much money is being allocated to the urban ag office at USDA. That's the office that basically coordinates the FSA resources and the NRCS resources for urban ag centers. We have 17 centers. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar enough to know whether there's one in your district, but we've asked for resources to expand that beyond 17. Each of the 17 urban centers has an FSA office in place and an NRCS representative that can work with producers to try to determine. The other thing I would suggest is that you look at the Regional Food Business Center concept that I mentioned earlier, because that too can help farmers potentially think about ways in which they can create market opportunities for whatever it is they're growing. On Cuba, I mean, the reality is there's a significant impediment to trade in Cuba because of, I think, legislation that requires essentially payment in advance in cash in U.S. dollars, which makes it very, very difficult for a lot of ag trade to take place. I know that there are secretaries of agriculture and commissioners from states that go to Cuba periodically with trade missions with some limited success. It is an option. I mean, it's an island that basically imports 80% of their food. So there's obviously a market there. It's just a question of whether you can remove that barrier and make it a little bit easier from a business perspective to do business in Cuba. On food as medicine, there are three responses. One, we did and have increased our commitment to GusNIP, which is the program that basically funds the prescription medicine program with pediatricians and encourages and incents fruit and vegetable purchasing as ways in which pediatricians in particular can assist young people with particular diseases and challenges that they face. You mentioned regenerative agriculture. That's one of the reasons why we established the Climate Smart Agriculture Commodity Initiative, take a look, have your staff take a look at that in terms of the state of California and the number of projects that are currently operating in that state, and the producers that are involved, and the partners who are involved, and the universities that are involved. And then finally, we have an organic transition initiative designed to make it easier for people to be, if they wish to transition, to become organic producers. We also just recently announced, I think roughly 50 grants, I think it's right, 50 grants, market development grants to encourage more market opportunities for organic production, which would make supply more accessible.
I would suggest there's potentially a bigger problem. And I sat in this very room yesterday, and the military is looking at its challenges with retention. You've got a retention challenge too, but the military surveyed and found that 32%, only 32% of families would suggest others follow in their footsteps. I'm hearing over and over from people who've left the agency that loved it, love the USDA, grew up around farming, but throw their hands up and quit because they don't feel supported, and will often hear pay, whether it's school teachers or military. Just a moment. Whether it's teachers, military, whatever it may be, there's always a cost with public service, and usually pay is an example of what people cite. But if people are content in what they're doing, they feel like they're supported, they don't quit, and they're leaving. Not because they don't like what they're doing anymore, but because they feel like they're fighting a bureaucracy that doesn't help them.
That doesn't jive with the surveys that are done of our employees. We've seen employee morale significantly increase since the last administration.
Interestingly enough, the ERS has said that calendar year 2023, all food inflation is 6% or 6.4, that ballpark. But for WIC,
Yeah, but you can't use that, you got to be careful with that, because the WIC has certain particular items.
this is my point, and I was just about to make that point. You and I are on exactly the same bandwidth on this. That's correct. On the WIC basket, it's actually 18%. The cost, again, with the department figures. So I'm curious as to whether or not you project the increased need is due to inflationary pressures on the WIC basket. So if you could get that information to me, I'd appreciate
I
that.
think it's both. I think there's an expectation and a belief that WIC that there will continue to be expansion of WIC participation.
Right, but it's only 1% of
Well,
last year.
I'm not sure what year you're looking at.
I'm looking at 2023, where it was 6.455 million people in January and 6.522.
Well, you
Now,
can't-
Common Core math is that's a 1% increase, and it's pretty consistent throughout the year.
Well, I don't know about that. I think there is some variation from month to month.
Yeah, and in fact, over the last 3 months of data, last 4 months of data, it's actually decreased. So yes, you're right, it's been inconsistent, but the last 4 months of data from the department show actually a decrease in participation. So all I want to know is, could you get me the modeling data on how you?
We can get you the information. I also caution you to remember that part of what we're asking for is to replenish the transfer that was required because we didn't have a budget on time.
Thank you. If you give me the data, again, the modeling data, I'd appreciate that.
How can the USDA ensure sensitive data on lab-created bird flu strains is not used for malign purposes by the CCP, for example, for bioweapons development?
To my knowledge, there's not the sharing that you've suggested, and that all of this is basically walled off. So everything we're doing stays with us. It doesn't necessarily go to the UK or to China.
Do you have confidence in these walls that you
Yes.
are speaking to?
Yes.
All right. The Wuhan Institute of Virology had walls, and it was
Well,
identified.
We're not in China, sir. We're just a different
As an
deal.
affiliate of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the U.S. government's 10-year debarment levied against the Wuhan lab, the Foreign Affairs Committee has proposed sanctions against the CAS due to the Wuhan lab's gain-of-function research, violation of NIH grant terms, and subsequent cover-up. Why is the USDA still collaborating with the CAS on risky virus research when it has violated U.S. grant and gain-of-function policies, obstructed COVID origin investigations, and refused to share critical data on U.S.-funded coronavirus research at its lab in Wuhan?
It's really not a collaboration per se, because everyone is doing their own separate research. Obviously, it's in the best interest of all of us that we figure this HPAI out so that we don't continue to see the devastation that has occurred in this country. We've spent close to $1 billion of CCC resources trying to help our turkey, chicken, and egg layers industry survive this. So we got to we have to figure out how to solve it and how to stop it. We have to figure out how to vaccinate. We have to figure out all of the very complicated process involving vaccination.
I would agree.
Turkeys love it, chickens don't. I mean, there are just a
We got
lot of challenges.
growers and processors in my district, but we shouldn't
We're
compromise
not-
our national security when
This is,
we are.
our national security is not being compromised at all with reference to this particular circumstance.
Well, will you commit to terminating the involvement of the CAS and
There's
other
nothing-
state
there's
control
nothing to
entities in
terminate.
this and other USDA research?
There's nothing to terminate.
Well, I think you shouldn't be, these walls you claim to have created, I would highly doubt are.
Well, you're doing a disservice to the professionals and scientists who work for USDA when you say that, sir.
You're doing a disservice to our national security and to
No,
our country.
not even close.
Mr.
Not
Secretary,
even
I yield
close.
back.
The American Rescue Plan provided $50 million. Has all that been dispersed? And what is the 2025 budget request in that line item, please?
I don't know the specific line item. The resources from the American Rescue Plan have been provided for modernization of the program and also expanded access to the program. Thousands of additional seniors receive benefits under this.
All right.
I'm concerned about the impacts of Pactive Evergreen's failure to deliver branded half-pint milk cartons to schools and hospitals in the San Joaquin Valley. Is the United States Department of Agriculture aware of this issue, and if so, how is it responding?
We are, and that's one of the reasons why we've been supportive of the Reach and Resiliency effort to try to create alternative distribution systems for milk. In addition to those cartons being difficult to open, there's also an issue with the temperature of the milk, which discourages kids from consuming the milk. So we've taken a look at ways in which we can provide resources to schools to create dispensing systems that will chill the milk and eliminate the need for those cartons.
Okay, because as of right now, the carton shortage is a real problem, and
It is, no question, you're absolutely right.
I mean, even Senator Schumer advised or put a statement out in November of last year, so this isn't a new problem.
We're aware of it. We don't make the cartons. We're aware of the fact that people need them.
And the technology you mentioned, how far out is that technology from?
It's been around for a while, long time.
Is it being deployed then?
It is in some schools, but not all schools, obviously.
Okay.
I know there are many black farmers, well, not a lot, but maybe 100 or so African-American farmers in the Central Valley. And I know they've had difficulty in the past accessing loans and accessing all of the programs of USDA. And I'm wondering, and I can ask you, you can respond in writing to this, if in fact that you see the equity issue with black farmers in California being addressed through the USDA.
I would say equity issues with black farmers across the United States are being addressed in a multitude of ways. One, with the Equity Commission recommendations to ensure that we are providing better access to programs. Two, with the equity action plans, which we can get you copies of, that each mission area at USDA has adopted with recommendations to make sure that access is available. Three, and efforts to try to those who have done business with USDA, if they find themselves financially distressed, we're working to provide loan servicing opportunities to give them a bit of breathing room so that they can get themselves back on track. And then finally, to the extent that they've experienced discrimination, there's a financial assistance program that you all created under the Inflation Reduction Act. Nearly 60,000 applications have been made in that program. I can't tell you what the breakdown is relative to black and other minorities who may have experienced discrimination, but I'm confident that there are a significant number of black farmers in that group.
So my question is simply, how is your agency planning on executing the authorities and actions signed into law to address foreign ownership of U.S. agricultural lands?
We're going to make every effort to follow the GAO recommendations, and we're going to make every effort to follow the instructions and directions that you provided in the bill. Now, frankly, we just got the bill, so we've been trying to figure out how we're going to do with some of the reductions that have been, not necessarily in this particular area, but in other areas that impact and affect FPAC. But, we're going to do what you've asked us to do. We'll do it as best we can.
So I would just say, it's one thing for a farmer to be able to file a claim or open a report or something like that with the Office of Civil Rights. It's another thing for there to be data analysis done and these kinds of disparities on record. And in the same way that in the general market, we do see disparities in home loan rates from places like Navy Federal Credit Union or Wells Fargo, I would just say that the data indicates that there is a disparity, and the Office of Civil Rights has an opportunity, or elsewhere in your department, may have an opportunity to help to rectify it.
I'm not
And-
sure there is a disparity. In fact, I mean, if you look at the percentage of black farmers to the total population of farmers,
Yeah.
it's significantly less than 36%.
No. 36% of black farmers who applied for a direct loan received one. 72% of white farmers who applied for a direct loan received
And
one.
how many of those farmers went through the full process in terms of being denied? Sometimes that data point includes those who voluntarily, for whatever reason, decided not to continue to apply. I want to make
Okay.
sure we're talking about apples and
Well,
apples here.
perhaps then the department can follow up with
Sure.
us and share the information, particularly on the partial completions, and we can do some further analysis.
Absolutely.
I'm curious to know how 30% or more in appropriations is only yielding 2 to 5% coverage to family farms back home who are suffering.
I'd have to look at the specifics of the individual farmers that you've identified, but what we did in Louisiana is we provided 1,980 farmers more money than they would have gotten under the previous system. 1,000 got a little bit less. But the reality is, we told you, and we told members of this Congress, you needed to give us somewhere between $10 and $12 billion, and you made the decision to give us $3 billion. So it's not surprising that the amount of relief and assistance was significantly less than what it had been the year before, when we actually had $10 billion. So we made the decision based on the fact that we could receive limited resources, that we were going to try to provide as much help to farmers who absolutely needed the help, and that's the reason we did what we did. And in your case, nearly 2,000 farmers received more. About 66% of your farmers who received emergency assistance received more under this system.
I'd just be interested to know how those decisions are made. Do you agree that the department needs to get focused on providing more agriculture support at the USDA, turning around net farm income for the family farm, and getting the fundamental programs that the FSA administered in a timelier manner?
I would agree that we want to do everything we can to give farmers as much opportunity as we can to earn as much income as they can.
Okay, well, can you provide a comprehensive plan to us to address these timeliness problems?
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Okay, well, that's fine. I yield back.
The subcommittee stands adjourned.